Did you know that the average American changes jobs 12 times throughout their lifetime? And when that happens, one of the more common and confusing things that people have to face is, what do I do with my workplace retirement account, with my employer 401k? Well, if you're considering changing jobs, or if you have changed jobs recently, then you may be asking yourself, what do I do with my 401k? Can I roll it over? Can I cash it out? What are, if there are any tax consequences or penalties for doing things like that? See, changing jobs is one of the more common financial transitions that people face, and then we have to deal with and tackle how we handle these retirement accounts. So here today in this video, I'm going to walk you through some of the options that are available to you. We'll walk through some of the pros and cons of each one so that you can decide which one is best for your financial situation. Let's start with the very first and most important point. When you change jobs, it doesn't automatically mean that you lose your money. That money is yours. However, what you can do with it depends entirely on your financial situation and where you're moving to if you are indeed starting at a new employer, having switched now. Generally, there are four main options that are available to you when you do change careers and want to move money around. You can either, one, leave it in that old retirement account at that old or previous employer. Two, you can roll it into your new employer-sponsored plan. Three, you can roll it over into an IRA. Or four, you can cash out the entire balance of that account. So today we'll go through each one carefully. Option one, leave the money exactly where it's at. See, a lot of people don't even realize that this is an option that you have at your disposal. If your account balance is above a certain threshold, which is typically around $5,000, you can usually leave your old retirement account sitting and staying in that account and invested as it is at your old employer. Now, there are some pros and upsides and benefits to doing this. One of those is that we avoid creating any taxable event. There's no tax consequences that we trigger, nothing that has to happen in that moment or in that year even. Number two is you can continue the tax deferred growth of that account. It will continue to have the same exact tax deferred growth that it had when you were still employed and contributing to that account. Another one is that the potential investment options may be low cost, that you are already inside of that account. Now, what about some of the negatives? What about some of the cons to this option? Well, the first and foremost one is you can no longer contribute to that account. Once you leave your old employer, you are no longer eligible to contribute to that employer-sponsored retirement plan. Number two, you may have limited investment choices. See, within a 401k or another employer-sponsored plan, you're typically limited to only their investment menu that they've negotiated with or created through whatever custodian they're using to sponsor that plan. Number three, the third con of that is that you will have another account to keep track of. See, if you're switching to a new job, a new employer, odds are you're going to open up another employer-sponsored retirement account there. And now, rather than having just one employer retirement account, you now have two. That's double the workload to keep track of and to pay attention to and manage those accounts. And the last one is that sometimes older plans may have higher administrative fees. This option of keeping your old plan exactly as it is may make sense for you if the investment options are strong, if you've had good returns and you've liked those investment options. If the fees are low, some administrative fees can be very low for employer-sponsored plans. Or three, if you prefer simplicity in the long run, the simplicity to just not move those dollars, leave them exactly as they are. You know the account number, you know how to get in, you know how to check it. It is simpler in the long run in that sense. However, many people find it more beneficial to consolidate their retirement accounts as they go along in life. Option two would be to roll your old employer plan or 401k into your new one. Now that you've switched employers, this option may be available to you. You do have to check with the new administrator and custodian if your new employer plan allows this, but many do. And that would be what we call a direct rollover. And it would just simply be taking your old 401k and they would directly roll over or deposit that balance into your new one with your current employer, or your new current employer, I should say. Now, what are some of the pros to this? What are some of the benefits to choosing this option? Well, the first one is, of course, simplicity. That now you've gone from the potential of having two accounts to now you've consolidated them into one. And having one account is certainly easier to manage and pay attention to than two. Another one is that it keeps the money in an ERISA protected employer plan. There are certain protections and benefits that you have with keeping those dollars inside of a plan that is sponsored by your employer. And the third one is really kind of the same as the first benefit, which is just simpler record keeping. It's again knowing that at the end of the year, or when it comes tax time, you really only have one set of statements from one account that you need to find and produce and keep for your records rather than having multiple, especially if it's your 12th job change, as many Americans do. You would rather have one account or two rather than 12 separate employer retirement accounts that you have to keep track of. What are some of the cons of this option of rolling those old dollars into the new account? Well, the first one is that you are still limited on the investment menu or the investable options that you have for those retirement dollars. That investment menu is really selected by your employer in conjunction with custodian and plan administrator, so that you'll see when you're logging into that account and managing it and investing it that you only have a set number of funds or options that are typically available to you. The second one is that fees vary by employer. They vary and they range between employers, administrators, and custodians. So that would be something to keep in mind, is if there would be an increase in fees to roll over your old account into your new one. Another one is that not all accounts accept rollovers from past ones. Again, this is something to talk to your account administrator or account custodian about. This option is really attractive and beneficial, again, for people who really just value simplicity. The simplicity of having one account and having their assets pooled together, that simplicity, it reduces, again, record keeping. They can keep everything together, and it simplifies seeing how your assets are performing and what sort of returns you're receiving inside of those retirement accounts. Option 3 is to roll that old employer plan into an IRA. This is a very common occurrence, a very common transaction that many people do, and it's also considered a direct rollover. It would be directly rolling over those dollars from that old plan into your IRA without you ever taking possession of those dollars in your bank account, for example, or any other sort of account. It would be direct from one custodian account into another. Now, what are some of the benefits of doing this? Why would you want to do this? Well, first and foremost would be it broadens the investment menu that you have at your disposal. Rather than being limited to only the selection of mutual funds or maybe ETFs and a couple of other options that your employer and custodian and administrator have put together for you, you now have broadened your options and opened it up to just about any investment out there. That within an IRA, you can purchase any mutual funds, ETFs, you can purchase bonds and CDs and things along those lines, and a variety of different assets that match your risk tolerance and match your goals. Another one is that the options may be lower cost. You will no longer necessarily have the same administrative fees that were tied to your old employer plans or maybe even your new ones. And there's some additional options out there like Roth conversions, even some backdoor Roth options, and a few things that you would have, again, at your disposal if you selected this option to roll your old 401k or employer plan into an IRA. What about the reasons to not roll your 401k into an IRA? Well, one of them would be, depending on the state that you live in, the state that you were employed in even, creditors can have more access to getting into your IRAs if you were to have something happen in terms of your credit and collections agencies, as opposed to keeping dollars within a retirement account at your employer or an employer-sponsored retirement account. Another one also would be that moving those dollars out of that 401k into an IRA can complicate some later on in life backdoor Roth strategies. That really comes into play with something we call the pro rata rule. And we'll have a video on that later on, a little bit down the line. And lastly is more investment options out there. For some people, that's very exciting, and it could increase, of course, returns, or just some people like playing in the markets and investing those dollars as they see fit. To other people, however, that option or that increase in options available could be intimidating. That could be something that they don't want to have to deal with. And so that could be a con there. And that also depends on if you're working with a financial professional, with a financial advisor or wealth advisor that can help you to make those decisions or make some recommendations to help you along the line. For many people, though, this option to roll your 401k into an IRA provides the greatest flexibility. Provides the greatest flexibility in terms of investment choices, also in terms of additional uses that you can use those dollars for. However, it is important to note and to consider that there are long-term tax implications when it comes to moving these dollars over from a 401k into an IRA. Option 4, or the final option that is available to you when switching employers, is to cash out the entire account. So you can look at your 401k or employer retirement account and say, I want the entire amount. I want to take it all with me as I leave and as I switch employers to do, you fill in the blank. There are studies that show that over 40% of workers that switch employers, they do deplete or withdraw their account balance. Most of them end up depleting the entire account balance, in fact. But if this is an option that you're considering, there are a few things to keep in mind. One of those is that if you're withdrawing those dollars prior to the age of 59 and a half, there is an additional 10% penalty that is levied on top of that withdrawal. You'll have to pay that. For example, if you withdraw $50,000, there's a $5,000 penalty that you'll be required to pay. Not only that, but the entire amount that you pull and do withdraw is fully taxable. Depending on the state that you live in, you'll likely be paying federal and state income tax on those dollars. You also will lose the future tax-deferred benefit to those dollars. Now, if you were to take those dollars and let's say you decided to pull it out of that tax-deferred 401k, you wanted to put it instead into a taxable brokerage account, for example. Well, now you lost that tax-deferred benefit, and now you're into a taxable account. So that necessarily wouldn't be a huge benefit to you. Not only that, but this is again one of those opportunities where people look at it and say, I want the instant cash, I want it now, and they don't think about the years of compound growth and interest that they were potentially going to have on those dollars. So this approach, there's a chance that it makes sense for your specific situation depending on where you're at in life, but I want to encourage you to take this approach with caution. What about vesting? Maybe you've heard of this term out there when talking or setting up your retirement account, but it's called vesting. And it's important to understand that your own contributions to your 401k are always yours. You are always 100% vested in your contributions, but your employer's contributions, however, are typically or often subject to what we call a vesting schedule. What that means is that a certain percentage of those dollars that your employer contributes to that account, if they are contributing and giving you a match there, a certain percentage of those dollars typically become yours, or where you're fully vested in those dollars. Sometimes it's a certain percentage per year, maybe over a 5 to 7 year schedule, or sometimes it's what we call a cliff, where you may not be vested in those dollars at all that they contribute, but then once you've been there for, let's say, 5 years, you hit that 5th year anniversary, then those dollars are 100% vested and they're all yours then. So if you leave your employer before you're fully vested in that account, you may be leaving money on the table. So before switching jobs, it's worth checking to see what that vesting schedule is, or whether waiting a few months, if that's an option for you, would increase that vested balance in that retirement account that then, again, would be your full amount that you own and you can have. See, sometimes making this job transition at the right time can preserve a significant amount of retirement dollars. There are some special tax considerations that I want to encourage you to keep in mind when you're considering rolling over your old 401k plan. Those are, of course, like I said, direct rollovers that we talked about earlier, or indirect rollovers. So there's an important distinction between the two of them. When it comes to rolling over dollars through a direct rollover, that means you never take possession of those dollars. It does not create a taxable event, and typically no taxes are withheld during that transition or during that rollover, and there's no penalties applied. Now, if you choose the second option, if you choose to enact an indirect rollover, What that really amounts to is the check that would be the rollover amount would instead be made out to you rather than to your new custodian or new plan administrator, but it would instead be made out to you. You would then be responsible for contributing those dollars to your new account, whether it's the IRA or your 401k, within 60 days of receiving that rollover. If you don't contribute or don't deposit those dollars within that 60-day mark, then penalty and tax can apply. And that would be, of course, a detraction from those rollover dollars, from that rollover amount that you were trying to go through this process with. And additionally, when it comes to an indirect rollover, many custodians will mandatorily withhold 20% for taxes, just in case you decide not to actually roll those dollars over. My encouragement for you is to really consider direct rollovers when they're an option. The reason that I say that is operating with indirect rollovers creates an unnecessary and often stressful amount of complexity and risk that oftentimes just doesn't make the most sense to expose yourself to. So when it's a possibility, when it's an option, direct rollovers are simpler, safer, and often quicker than indirect rollovers. One other consideration is that some retirement accounts, some 401ks, especially in recent years, have Roth options. Those would be post-tax portions of that retirement account. You might have just all of your account in Roth 401k, again, that's post-tax, or you might have a portion of your retirement account that is pre-tax or tax deferred, and a portion that may be in post-tax in Roth dollars. So whenever you roll over those accounts into an IRA or into a new 401k, they will each go into, generally, the same tax bucket. Meaning if you have Roth 401k money, then you can roll those dollars tax-free, penalty-free into a Roth IRA. Now, if you have pre-tax or tax-deferred dollars, like a traditional 401k, you can roll that portion into a traditional IRA that is taxed the same as the original account. So how do you decide what's best for you? How do you decide which one to go with? Well, that's a very specific and individual answer, but some of the things to consider, again, would be investment options, investment fees, management fees, future tax planning goals, creditor protection, things like that, or maybe even anticipated career path, career growth opportunities, and what account options are available to you with your new employer. That's a strong piece of this consideration. Sometimes leaving funds in your old employer account makes sense. Sometimes it makes the most sense to roll those dollars into your new employer. Sometimes it makes the most sense to roll them into an IRA or a Roth IRA. And there are, of course, like I said, there are some times that it makes the most sense and it's the most financially beneficial to cash out those dollars. There are a few common mistakes that I would encourage you to avoid, however. And one of those being cashing out those dollars, cashing out those accounts without understanding the tax and penalty consequences, because there are some. So I want to encourage you to look into that further. You can always call your plan administrator to discuss those, as well as maybe your tax professional or financial advisor. Another one is about forgetting vesting schedules. Again, different employers, different plan administrators are going to have different schedules of where their contributions are able to actually be owned by you. Something to definitely check into. Another one is the 60-day deadline, the 60-day timeline for indirect rollovers, something to be very mindful of. Also consider your long-term tax strategy. There's a lot of people that get these blinders and this tunnel vision, and they only look at this year without considering future tax implications that rollovers may affect. And also, I would encourage you, really encourage you, don't lose track of old accounts. Always keep good records and keep good notes on what accounts you have with old employers, because it does happen that people forget about accounts out there. They forget that they had dollars, maybe $50,000 with an employer that they were with 10, 11, 12 years ago, maybe more. I'd encourage you, if you do think that you have accounts out there, reach out to that employer. Try to speak with their plan administrator, and they can help you find those new accounts, or those old accounts rather, and then make a decision from there what to do with that, if it makes sense to move into some sort of new account. Why does this matter? Well, like we said, job changes are becoming more and more common out there. Like we said earlier, most Americans will change jobs 12 times throughout a lifetime. Employers will see people come, they will see people go. And so if you're considering switching jobs, or if you're in the middle of it, or maybe you just did make a career change or a position change or whatever that may or may not have been in your life, each transition offers the opportunity to either simplify and strengthen your financial picture, your financial structure, or create fragmentation and unintended tax consequences that could have implications for years down the line. Handled properly, these transitionary points can offer some really good options and really good benefits to taking hold of your financial life. Handled poorly, they can create unintentional setbacks. So if you're switching jobs, considering it, or if you just did, remember, those dollars that you contributed or that you had invested in an old retirement account, you don't just lose them. They're still yours. Now you just have to make a decision on what to do with them, what to do with those dollars, where to direct them moving forward. Understanding your options, be it leaving it, rolling it over to a new plan, rolling it over into an IRA, each one has an effect and has an implication in your broader financial life, in your broader financial picture. Each one has benefits, has pros, has cons, and I want to encourage you to consider those carefully. So if you'd like any help on evaluating how to make that decision on which one is best for your specific situation, leave me a comment, like and subscribe to this channel, and I'd be happy to connect anytime.